Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel. On what's been a lovely day, we've all been enjoying the sun, and I'm delighted to say that we are joined by Ahmed Shooble, who reports on Bournemouth for The Athletic. Is that correct, Ahmed?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yep, thank you very much. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, man?
Yeah, all good, all good. You know, the Euros are finished now. We're just all getting geared up for real football to commence again, aren't we? So, obviously, the purpose of this video is because it looks like Everton might just have made their first signing of the summer transfer window. It's not probably the signing we expected, but could it be a signing we maybe need? Possibly. But it's Asmir Begovic, and he obviously formerly of Bournemouth, and it's not been quite confirmed yet. There's been a few photographs of him in the Everton shop recently. This has came around quite quickly and out of the blue because it hasn't really been a player that Everton have been predominantly linked with over this summer. But obviously, Ahmed, you know more than a lot of Evertonians. You've obviously been watching Begovic for quite some time. So what sort of player would Everton be getting in Begovic?
Well, firstly, I think it's probably clear he's a Premier League quality keeper. He shone last season in the Championship with Bournemouth. I think he's a reliable shot stopper. I think he'll probably prove, with all the greatest respect to him, I think Olsen was on loan for you guys last season. He was the understudy to Pickford. I think Begovic will probably prove more of a worthy understudy in that regard, not much of a drop-off. I think the only thing that Pickford has above Begovic in spades is obviously his ability to play the ball. Saying that, though, a couple of times last season, Begovic had he loved the Schmeichel-esque bowl out to start the counter-attack. His distribution in terms of, I think Pickford's really good at this as well, where he sort of throws the ball up in the air and then just slices through it to start the counter-attack. And it's actually pretty accurate. So his distribution isn't that bad, but I wouldn't say it's on Pickford's level. So in that regard, I'd say you guys have got probably a more suitable number two. And yeah, he's been a reliable shot stopper as well. There's not much I can say to fault him, to be honest. I think it's probably, like you say, not a signing you would have expected, but it seems a shrewd move, particularly for both parties, I'd say.
Yeah, certainly, absolutely. So obviously, you mentioned there that it's a player of Premier League quality, which is something which is very important. Every club needs some quality in that backup position. So just more focusing now more towards him as Bournemouth's keeper. Obviously, we look statistically seem to be one of the better, if not the best, goalkeeper in the Championship last season, and that a lot of that is probably down to his experience and what he brought to Bournemouth. So, as someone so closely following Bournemouth, how do you rate his time with the Cherries?
Quite well, actually, quite well. I mean, there was a difficult patch back a couple of seasons back where he went away on loan. I think there was a disagreement between him and Eddie Howe. I'm not too sure on that. Don't quote me on that. But there was he obviously wasn't the first choice, and he got a move to Karabag, and then he got from January onwards to AC Milan. I think that was in the 18-19 season. But other than that, coming in last season, he was obviously the main keeper, the first choice. And like I say, I couldn't really put a foot wrong. He couldn't put a foot wrong, rather. He's not necessarily been phenomenal, but just very reliable. There were times where Bournemouth's defense would get in a muddle, and he'd just pull out a worldy save out of nowhere and just keep us in the game. But I feel like because a lot of Bournemouth's play, the eye-catching stuff happens up the pitch with the attackers, with Danjuma, Solanke, Billing. So those moments where Pickford saves, I mean, I had to just watch a couple of saves back just in preparation for this. And I even forgot some of the saves that he pulled off against just random long shots that you completely forgot about because the game was moving so fast that you didn't really notice it. But having gone back and looked at it, he is definitely reliable. And I feel like he's a worthy building block to build upon for Everton next season.
Yeah, absolutely. You've spoken before about how Robin Olsen was number two, and he was a great signing for us. I think a lot of Evertonians would have been quite happy for him to be the number two, and I think this maybe suggests that move might not be materialising. But Begovic, I go back to the word experience. He's had a spell at Stoke City. I think that's where he spent the majority of his career, where he got his most games in the Premier League. Of course, he had a spell at Chelsea. And then, am I right in saying that he was at AC Milan for a short while as well last season? So just on Begovic, obviously, is the general consensus that Bournemouth would be sad to see him go? Do you feel like maybe should Bournemouth have gained promotion last season, he would have stayed, or was this something which Bournemouth sort of could have seen coming?
It's difficult to say for sure. I imagine if Bournemouth went up, they probably would have kept Begovic, because Begovic, I imagine, wants Premier League football, like probably a few other Bournemouth players as well. I was everything he's accomplished. He's had 2 spells. I think when he was actually at Portsmouth, Harry Redknapp, he moved to Bournemouth on loan for about 8 months or so back in 2008-9 season. So he's had 2 spells. He's the fans know him and love him well. In fact, he was actually Bournemouth's last captain in their last competitive game, which was the playoff semi-final. I'm not sure if you caught that, but there was a lot of. Is this a family-friendly podcast? Is this a family-friendly podcast?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just say he wasn't averse to the odd blankhousery. I think.
Okay. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Just sort of maybe convincing the referee to make a decision or not that he necessarily wouldn't have made if Begovic wouldn't have acted a certain way. Just sort of, kind of a lot of what we saw from Italy, less of the time wasting. I'd say that game had there were a lot of emotion, a lot of I guess that's you can't help but to call that an asset. But yeah, I feel like either way, I don't think Bournemouth fans will be sad to see him go, really, because obviously the links with Freddie Woodman, who's at Newcastle now, has hit a snag because he's been injured, and that would mean that. But I think the idea is that Begovic is on big wages, and having him on those wages in the Championship, with potentially Freddie Woodman coming in, probably wouldn't make the most sense. So the idea is, with selling Begovic, it is sad, and it is sad to see a long-time club stalwart go. But at the same time, I think there is a little bit of a culture shift with Bournemouth. I think they're not afraid to shake things up and keep moving, particularly if that means getting Begovic's wages off the wage bill and making way for perhaps 2 or 3 younger acquisitions. So it's balanced on that regard. I wouldn't say it's necessarily one way or the other. Of course, Bournemouth fans will miss him and thank him for everything he's done, and he's done a lot for Bournemouth. But at the same time, it's probably best. I wouldn't say not to sort of overstay your welcome, but to know when it's time to say, you know what, I've had my time here, I've done what I could, and I want to move somewhere else. And I think both parties, like I said earlier, that this looks a shrewd move for both parties. A club like Everton, who need a suitable number 2 keeper, and Bournemouth, who could probably do with a little bit more leeway in terms of finances with the wage bill.
Do you feel like Begovic, obviously it's no secret that he's coming in as the number 2 to Jordan Pickford, but do you feel that Begovic could potentially give Jordan Pickford that push that Robin Olsen gave? Do you feel like he's going to be definitely a competitor for that number 1 shirt at Everton? Do you feel like he's definitely not done yet and he can offer some serious competition? Or do you think this is very much just a stopgap for maybe early rounds in the cup or any injuries?
I mean, initially, I think it will probably be, thinking about it, just the first time I saw the move, I thought it would just be a stopgap, a number 2. But it would really depend on what Benitez thinks. I feel like managing Pickford, I feel like he feels like that number 1 spot is his, that starting role is his. And I feel like, particularly with Gareth Southgate is a manager who knows how to manage Pickford and put his arm around him and say, no matter what happens, no matter what blunder you make, no matter how high profile the mistake that you make is, or whatever, you will be my number 1 player. Whether or not Benitez will take that same approach, or whether he'll be more no nonsense about it and be like, if Begovic is Begovic is less erratic, he's more of a reliable player for me. I don't imagine he'll probably upset the fans like that, because I imagine Pickford is a fan favorite, and he's definitely one of the jewels in that Everton team. But I mean, if Benitez wanted to be more forthright and say, well, you know what, I'm Pickford, that's enough of you. You've made 1 too many errors. I want to have Begovic in now. I think Begovic would be a suitable option to have in that regard. I don't think The only issue with Pickford, I'd say, it depends again on what kind of football Benitez wants to play. Like most keepers, with the ball at his feet and playing out the back, he isn't the best. He was caught out a couple of times that last season with Bournemouth in that regard. In the early days when Tyndall was based more on possession-based football, but under Woodgate, the position was more based on the possession of the ball was more in transition. So Bournemouth were looking to fire off their fiery attackers, their pacey attackers, and getting to spaces to bowl out like Schmeichel did all those years ago, and to kickstart those counterattacks that way. So it would depend really on all those factors: what kind of football Benitez wants to play, how he wants to manage that. I guess rivalry, you could call it, between Begovic and Pickford now. So yeah, it really does depend. But I wouldn't be surprised if Benitez turns around and makes Begovic his main man.
Yeah, because we saw last season one key part what Carlo Ancelotti did. He said make Jordan Pickford out of the firing line and bring Robin Olsen in, which was quite interesting to see. We haven't really had that before. So if Begovic does come into this Everton side, and he starts to get into the games, you said quite rightly there, he's got the experience, he's sort of reliable, and I think reliability is what a lot of people want in the number twos. And there's been many times in the past where Everton maybe haven't had that, and we thought we did with Robin Olsen. It looks like that move's not happening now. So I actually feel like Begovic has probably got a lot to prove, because a lot of people actually took to Robin Olsen, and I'm sure Begovic will be look at his experience, what he's done for Bournemouth, Stoke, Chelsea, and he's played. He managed to get big moves to clubs like AC Milan as well. So it's definitely not a signing to forget about. It seems to be quite our first of many, we hope. But just finally, what are your final thoughts on this transfer for Everton? Is this a good move for the club? Do you feel like any closing thoughts? Do you feel like this is maybe like a club where Begovic is looking to finish his career, or do you feel like Asmir Begovic as a player has a lot to give to this Everton side?
I feel like he has a lot to give. I remember seeing a piece, I'm not sure how long ago it was, in the Bournemouth Echo, the local paper in Bournemouth. He was talking about playing up until his 40s. I think he's only 33 now, or 30, somewhere between 33 and 35. So he's not got that long off, but he still feels like he has a lot to give. Going to the games and seeing him prepare beforehand, he takes everything seriously. He's not a player who is in the sort of the final stages and he's trying to milk the last paycheck or whatever. He's genuinely, he still wants to be the best and still play at the highest level, evidently, because he's gone to the Premier League. So closing remarks, I'd probably say good move for Everton, probably good for Bournemouth to move on and seek a new keeper as well. Not to say that Begovic was bad or anything, just to say that if Begovic wanted to move up to the Premier League and Bournemouth aren't there, they can't necessarily stop him, particularly because it frees up your space on the wage bill. It's a move that makes sense for both parties. I'd say that's probably the closing remark I'd have.
Well, there you go, Ahmed. You've came on, you've given us the best insight. I have Ahmed for a long time. It's a sensible move, which I think is how we've got to look at it as Evertonians. It'll be interesting to see how he's going to fit into this side, seeing how Robin Olsen did last year. But it's a good move. Like Ahmed rightly said, it's a sensible move. It's a good move. It's for the best interest of Everton, and of course, it's in the best interest for Bournemouth as well. So obviously, a big thank you to Ahmed for taking time to come and speak to us on the Toffee Blues here today. He's given us a lot of good, insightful knowledge on our new number 2 keeper. We say all this, it's not even been confirmed yet, has it? So unless something dramatically wrong happens, then it's all looking like Begovic is going to be an Everton player. But yeah, big thank you to Ahmed for coming on the Toffee Blues YouTube channel. Be sure to drop us a like and subscribe if you haven't done already. Ahmed, thank you very much for coming on, and all the best to Bournemouth for this season.